Greetings and peace. I hope you and yours are doing well today, wherever you might be watching us from. Now, the title of today's education discussion will be The Epic of Gilgamesh and my analysis of it from my Sufi and my Masonic perspective. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a beautiful story about brotherhood, the quest for mortality, immortality, Gilgamesh discovering that the aspects of this world are an illusion. He had all the riches, women, pleasure, as a king, all the victories and achievements that a man can have. But at the end, he realized that his brotherhood with Enkidu and his impact on his city were his greatest treasures. And that was the beauty that I was able to pick up on it. And I want to give a shout out to my seventh grade history teacher. So back in seventh grade, I was introduced to Gilgamesh through our social studies class, and then he allowed me to borrow the book for a week. And I had fallen in love with the story. And I had promised to him that one day I would become a video game developer and I would make a Gilgamesh video game. But as life goes on, everything has its twists and turns, and we're all headed towards our individual journey in life. So if I wasn't able to make the video game, at least I can make a Sufi and Masonic discussion to help others understand what Gilgamesh is. So, the aspect of passing it on, that's the main thing. So, the edition that I was able to read was the Epic of Gilgamesh, this one. Now, this one has basically the original Sumerian tablets, but also the Akkadian, Babylonian, and the Hittite tablets. And this is translated by John D. Harris. So, if you get the Epic of Gilgamesh, get this version, the one by Mr. John D. Harris, because it includes all of the Akkadian, Babylonian, Sumerian, Hittites, all of the tablets, and it also has other predecessor stories from Sumerian mythology that ties into the Epic of Gilgamesh in other ways. So it's an expanded volume, not just the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it's an expanded volume of other stories as well, which I highly recommend. And I enjoyed it very much, and I thank Mr. Harris for putting this work together. And this is dedicated to him as well, to my seventh grade teacher and to Mr. Harris, the author of the book, from my perspective as a Sufi Muslim from Islamic mysticism, and as a Freemason on the teachings of Gilgamesh that I was able to pick up. So what I will do is, in this education discussion, is like I do with my other book review discussions that I do, is first I will give a synopsis of the story, and then what I'll do is I have like about 4 or 5 pages worth of notes of things that stood out to me, and then I will relate it from my perspective. So I thank you for that, and I hope you enjoy everything. So the aspect of the Epic of Gilgamesh starts off with this king of Uruk, or Uruk, and Mesopotamia is the land between the rivers, between the Euphrates and the Tigris River in Iraq, modern day. And Gilgamesh he was basically shown as an individual that was out of control. He was taking everyone's brides, he was conquering everything. Like he had this lust for control, power, women, everything. And then one day, the gods, or the high council of the gods, they consulted on what to do with Gilgamesh, because Gilgamesh was also, he had that balance too. So he also had that element of light and darkness. So his darkness was he was going around doing what he was doing, and then his light aspect was he was a high priest at the temple. So he would construct these temples and he would go around doing his thing with the brick mortars. So that reminded me of the Masonic aspect. And what happened was that there was a time where he was not able to circumscribe his desires, and then the gods had a meeting. Then they created this creature from the wilderness in Kaidu, who was like a man slash animal type being. And Enkidu came, and when he was about to go into the chamber of the brides, of these brides that were getting ready to get married, because he would take the brides from their original husbands and claim them as their own, and then give them to their husbands. So Enkidu stepped in his way and told him to get his act together. And then they fought ferociously. Enkidu got the best of him, and then after that, him and Enkidu became good friends. So this reminded me of the aspect of a brother Mason giving another brother Mason good counsel, to let him know if he's not doing anything that's out of character, he tells him that you need to get your act together, and this is not how you should act. That's what happened between Enkidu and Gilgamesh, and they became inseparable brothers and friends. And it also reminds me from the Sufi Islamic perspective, where Imam Ali, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and one the Sufis look up to as a great master, would always say that a true friend is one who always points out your faults to you. So someone patting you on the back, just smiling, playing along, praising you, that's the one you gotta watch out for. So Enkidu was the true friend who told Gilgamesh that what you're doing is wrong. And if I have to fight you to get your head straight again, then I will do that. And then after that, they gained that admirable respect and brotherhood for each other. So as time went on, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, they go into this, they have a journey. So they basically have this journey to prove that they are the best of the best. Then they go into the forest of the tall cedars, which from the Masonic aspect is the tall cedars of Lebanon. And that's the exact forest that they went to. Mind you, this story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, has existed before the Iliad, the Odyssey. So Sumerians, or the Sumer being the first recorded civilization on Earth, this is the original story. This has existed before the existence of any Western or Eastern esoteric books, stories, brotherhoods. So this is talking about all of these things way back, and this is the benefit that we get out of this story. So they go into the forest of the tall cedars of Lebanon, where even in the Masonic aspect, the cedars were used to construct the temple, and there they have to slay Humbaba, which is like this monstrous, like being that's there, like in the forest, part of the forest in some way. It's connected. It's some kind of a supernatural being. And then Gilgamesh and Enkidu take Humbaba down. So they take Humbaba down, and after that, the god, they invoke the wrath of the gods. And there's a time where Humbaba basically tempts Enkidu and Gilgamesh with pleasures of the world, and everything in the forest will worship you and belong to you. And that's the aspect of temptation, that Humbaba represented the darkness and a temptation, and Gilgamesh said, no, I'm going to take the other route. And that's what made some of the beings that were in charge of the hierarchy mad, on top of what Gilgamesh did with the world tree. Now, the mention of the world tree is also mentioned here, even before Norse mythology existed, that there was the Halup world tree, and then when Gilgamesh cut it down, the tree kind of went into the inner earth. And when Enkidu went to go get the tree back, he warned Enkidu of the inner earth civilizations and not to disturb anything, or whatever that was around him. And there he saw people that had passed from this realm that existed in the bottom realm. So the aspect of what in the Norse mythology, what they say on one realm existed on top of the other, and the world tree, that was already originally described in the Epic of Gilgamesh in Sumerian mythology. So all of these stories from these different mythologies and brotherhoods, it's all basically teaching you the same thing, like I covered with my other videos as well, that all the philosophies and religions that are out there, all a conduct of life. They all have that commonality, golden rules, and they're all teaching you to do the right thing. And as time went on, Ishtar also comes into Gilgamesh's life, and she tempts him. And Gilgamesh, as he's in the temple, as the Masonic characteristics go, he circumscribed his desires, which invoked the wrath of Ishtar. And then she sent the bull of heaven after him. They slayed the bull of heaven, and then the gods decided it was enough for Gilgamesh and Enkidu. And then they invoked the sickness upon Enkidu, and then Enkidu died, and Gilgamesh grieved for him like a brother Mason does for another brother Mason. And then he realized that, what is this life? I have riches, I have women, I have pleasure, I have this palace, but none of it brought me any happiness. What was it any for? So he renounces everything, and he just goes out. He travels from one end to the world to the other. He fights with lions at the mountain pass. He goes around looking for answers. He finds like these insect beings, like these scorpion men. He comes across them, and even they warn him that what you're looking for does not exist in this world. And then he goes to the edge of the world to find Utnapishtim, who is basically described as the Noah of this book. So this book also existed. It's like a story before the flood. And then Utnapishtim warns him that just make the best of your life that you have right now, or the aspect of memento mori and mortality. And then Gilgamesh returns back to his home and realizes that his greatest riches were not that what he had done, but the impact that he had on other people by building his city for the benefit of his people and his brotherhood and memories with Enkidu. Because that's what keeps us going. Everything in this life, when we die, we leave everything behind. Our titles, our degrees, our affiliations. What you do take with you is your good deeds, and what good did you do for yourself and others. And that's the epiphany that Gilgamesh had. And it was necessary that even Shamash, the sun god, he knew that it was necessary for all of these things to happen for Gilgamesh to be a complete person, full of wisdom, realizing his mistakes, and having this aspect of the growth. So that's what I was able to pick up from the story of morality and basically good character and self-improvement through all of the chaos and all the suffering that Gilgamesh had to endure. So that was basically my synopsis of the story, and I encourage you to read the story yourself so you can come with your own conclusion on own interpretation of it. So now I will do the Masonic and Sufi aspect of bringing this story to light. And I have my notes ready like I always do. So starting with page 1, Gilgamesh was a builder of Uruk, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that, and he's described as a brother to all men and one who seeked wisdom and journeyed the world. So the aspect of a Mason, the one who's a brother to all friends, all men. He journeys, he's a traveling man, he goes around different places, spreading his love and light and contributing his efforts to humanity's evolution and seeking wisdom, which is the aspect of the story. And a builder, he was a master builder who built the temple of God. And in Mesopotamia, they had those perfect baked bricks, the ashlar bricks, known as the Ina, to contribute to that deity. So they believed in a supreme being. They had these temples, perfect ashlar bricks. And the original builders they described were the 7 counselors who taught the 7 principal arts, which reminded me of how the Mason is taught to pursue the 7 liberal arts. They had these counselors of the temple who encouraged them to pursue the 7 principal arts. So that basically tied the story together. And they laid the cornerstone of the temple, just like you have different Masons that go and lay the cornerstone or have opening ceremonies for different buildings and temples throughout history. And Gilgamesh was known as the imperfect divinity. So the aspect of being perfect, nothing in this life is perfect. This realm that we're in, it's a spiritual school. And the aspect of Sufism, they teach you that if you were perfect, you wouldn't be here. So the reason you're here is because you're in the spiritual school, you're going through growth. Everyone makes mistakes, everyone makes epiphanies. Gilgamesh himself as a king realized his vanities, his illusions, his lust for life, and realized it was all for nothing. So he's described as an imperfect being who tried to smooth out his rough ashlar to become the perfect ashlar after the loss of his brother, and how his journey took him from one end of the world to the other, and how he tried to find that happiness and peace within his own life. So that's what he's described as the priest of the temple, and how he himself was imperfect, trying to do the right thing. So you have Shamhat, because when Enkidu came in, they had consulted with Gilgamesh, because Gilgamesh hadn't met Enkidu at the time. And they asked Gilgamesh, what should we do about this? He's taking away all of our traps when we're trying to hunt for game, and he's just causing problems for us, because he was trying to help the animals, as he was one of them. And Gilgamesh said, send Shamhat the harlot. And when Shamhat basically tempted Enkidu, Enkidu lost a part of his being in some way, where he lost weakness. And that's the importance of circumscribing your desires and living life within due bounds. And this is a aspect of the Mason as well, that you're taught to first work on yourself. We have this society where men are taught to chase women, do this, do that. But if you work on yourself and become the best version of yourself, then the right woman who corresponds to your frequency will choose you. And that's exactly, the benefit of that. It's like one of my friends said, that every pot has a lid. And in order to attract your other half, you have to be the best version of yourself first. So always work on yourself before you, fall astray to any temptation, which 9 out of 10 will get the best of you, hence the fallen state. So Enkidu and Gilgamesh fight when Enkidu goes there and stops him from taking the wives of the different individuals that were getting married. They fight, and after that, Enkidu counsels him, and they become brothers. Just like how I explained earlier, that the true Mason and the true friend, the true Sufi, the true brother, will always counsel you and stop you from doing the wrong thing. And it's ultimately for your own good. And that's the relation that they were able to build, the fraternal relation. And at the New Year's festival, they had I guess it goes by the lunar calendar with the Sumerians and all that aspect. And then when I see the picture of the Sumerian gods, they're praying like this, like, the aspect of the Islamic prayer. And then the lunar calendar is the same exact thing. So it shows you, even from our Islamic perspective, when they say that, when they talk about Freemasonry, where they say that it has existed since time immemorial, and we see these Masonic principles applied in the story of Gilgamesh's story, the first recorded civilization in history before anybody. Then even in Islam, they tell you that Islam has existed since day one, that everything, even the Sumerians, all the way up until now, everything was Islam. And that's why, God says in the Holy Quran that everything has been a stage of revelations and perfections in the 5th surah, where the revelation of the Quran, that now I have perfected your faith. So it's basically a continuation of the same exact faith that continues in many different ways. So that kind of stood out to me from my Masonic and Sufi Islamic perspective. So in the aspect of Enkidu and Gilgamesh, they go to the tall cedars of Lebanon, or that forest from Iraq to Lebanon. They go to the forest of the tall cedars, and there they go to fight the deity known as Humbaba, who protects the forest, or who is the guardian of the forest. And they describe him as somebody that sees you coming 20 days away, and he's readying, he's expecting you, and he's ready to basically take you on. And Gilgamesh puts his faith in God, or Shamash, or the sun being, and how even in the Masonic perspective, the sun is often given that regard in terms of that light. And you have Humbaba that basically puts up this fight against Gilgamesh, and then they were able to together defeat him with their combined efforts. Now Gilgamesh was blessed by the god Shamash of the sun, of the Masonic significance of the sun and the light. Enkidu and Gilgamesh, they slay Humbaba, the guardian of the forest of the tall cedars of Lebanon, possibly angering the gods, because there's an aspect where I guess many different faiths have this hierarchy too, where you have this realm, and there's a god in charge of this realm specifically. Then you have a council of gods, and then on top of that, you have the Most High, which is like the supreme, Godhead of all of them. So even in the Hindu perspective, they'll have the different gods, one serving each purpose. Then you have Brahma, the formless reality, the true Godhead. And in Islam, you have the 99 names of Allah, where you have each attribute of the 99 names, the knower, the seer, the destroyer, and then you have the one reality of Allah. So in this, it was described as the same thing, that you have this council of gods, and then you have one above the Most High that oversees all of them, and everyone has like their own assigned duty per se. And after that, what happens is they create this temple from the tall cedars. So they basically take control of the forest by slaying Humbaba. And Halub, the tree of life, like the Yggdrasil in Norse mythology. This is before Yggdrasil was ever mentioned in Sumerian mythology. And this is the aspect of the world tree. They cut it down, and then he sends Humbaba into the inner earth. He sends Enkidu into the inner earth to go and retrieve it. And he warns Enkidu that in there you're going to find all manners of things. Don't get tempted. It's like the Cave of Wonders when Aladdin goes in, the guardian of the cave, or the cave itself speaks to him that you can see whatever you want to see, but don't touch anything and don't get tempted by anything. And when it falls in there, Enkidu goes in. He sees many of the people in this life that have passed away, and now they're, I guess, reincarnated with different lives into these different civilizations inside the earth. And it kind of shows you that in the reality, what is heaven? What is hell? What are these different realities that we're in? It looks like everything is right here on this earth taking place. We're looking to these different places in space, over here, over there. While our planet itself is so rich, we haven't even discovered the extent of it. Even the humans, human subspecies, different animal species. There's so much taking place here that we're often taught to look outside while everything is right here, including the spiritual schools as well, where they always tell you to look outside, but everything is actually within the answers that you're seeking in your life. So the aspect of heaven, hell, I think it's teaching you that it's all right here. This metaphorical story or mythology, it's teaching you in its own way that everything is right here. Just like how in Freemasonry you're taught that you only get out of this life, or you only get out of Masonry what you put into it. So if you want your existence to be hell, you can do that by staying in hate, anger, low vibration, not being in gratitude. If you want your life to be heaven, you're in gratitude, wishing well for others, not being in anxiety, not hating on others. So everything is kind of a free will choice that you have right here in this life. You don't have to wait for anything special to come to you. You got to work for it. You got the life, and you need to make it happen. And that's what, from my Masonic and Sufi perspective, what I was able to pick up from this aspect of the world tree and the inner earths and the civilizations that are one existing on top of the other in the aspect of as above, so below. Now, Gilgamesh himself, after death, is known to be the judge of the underworld. So he cares for those who don't have anybody to bury them or speak their name. And this reminds me a lot of the aspect of the Sufis, who care for those who have basically been abandoned by society, or the aspect of a Masonic funeral, where if you've seen a Masonic funeral service, and there's plenty of them even on YouTube, that there's the aspect of all of these brothers that show up. Some of them don't even know the brother personally who has passed away, but they show up there to give respect to the family, to the departed soul, and give love and respect to that being for what he did on this earth, to his family. And that's what Gilgamesh is described as this judge in his current form that exists now after his death, who's there to care for those who people in this life don't know who they are. They don't remember their name. There's nobody to bury them, and he's the one that cares for those kind of beings. Like a Masonic funeral, you have these brothers that show up and assist the family, even though they might not even know the brother personally, but all of the members of that lodge show up and help them in terms of the respect and the proper farewell that they deserve. So that's one thing that stood out to me. So moving on to page 3, you have when Gilgamesh is there, when he's at the temple after the aspect of Humbaba and the world tree situation and his fight and brotherhood with Enkidu. Then we move on to the bull of heaven, and here it says that he's dressed in fresh clothing, put on a ceremonial robe, and wearing a sash tied around his waist like a Masonic apron when he went to work in the temple. So he's described as the high priest of the temple, or as the master of the temple, and he's described as somebody who's neat and clean, wearing fresh clothes like a suit, like modern day, wearing his robes, like his regalia. He has a sash around his waist, like in some countries they wear a sash in terms of their Masonic regalia, and he wears it around his waist like an apron before he goes to work in the temple. So that reminded me exactly of Gilgamesh's Masonic characteristics, and how even in the Sufi aspect, you must first cleanse yourself, or how in the Islamic prayers, you must first clean yourself with water before you do any prayers. So that kind of tied that in together for me. And Ishtar approaches him and tempts him that I'm going to give you everything that you desire, and I want to make love to you. And Gilgamesh circumscribes his desires and lives life within due bounds, like the Masonic characteristics that he displays. And he rejects her advances and circumscribes himself. And Ishtar, now basically this being, or a woman scorned, plots revenge against him, that he rejected me and I'm going to do everything I can to destroy him now. And Enkidu, and what happens is she goes to Anu, who's like this the supreme godhead above all of the other gods, and she requests the bull of heaven to come and slay Gilgamesh. And then when the bull of heaven comes down, Enkidu and Gilgamesh together slay the bull of heaven. And after that, what happens is the gods basically get angry that this team of Enkidu and Gilgamesh, they're going around doing what they're doing, and we gotta put one of them has to die. So they decide that it will be Enkidu. And Shamash had like a long-term plan. He kind of knew that after his death, Gilgamesh, from the Masonic point of view, that Gilgamesh would go from order out of chaos, where he will fall down, but he will get back up stronger. And he had long-term vision that Gilgamesh is going to leave everything. He's going to go get himself together, realize the truth of this life, journey around, gain wisdom, meet Utnapishtim. So all of this was in the works. They knew that this was going to happen, and Gilgamesh was going to do what he was going to do. And they had to help him embark on his fate by removing Enkidu from his life, and to spark that fire in him, that what am I doing with my life? So sometimes order out of chaos is necessary, even if at the time it does not make sense. It's like in the tarot or the spiritual stuff, they say somebody's having a tower moment. So the gods realize that if we give him this tower moment, order out of chaos, removing Enkidu, he's going to realize the importance of life and to make use of the wisdom and life that he has gained in this life to help others, and not just be selfish for his own pursuits, as the Mason is also a selfless individual. So they decide to end Enkidu's life, which devastates Gilgamesh. After Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh performs basically a Masonic funeral for him, the way that the story describes, with a sash around his waist and robes, and he basically departs his brother in a good and like manner, as we see today, that the same tradition carries on today. And after he renounces society and wanders into the wilderness as a traveling man, and he realizes that this life and all of its vanities, it's all an illusion. And even myself, I could relate to how Gilgamesh is feeling. I never chased anything, any desires, degrees, titles, women. For me, I'm here to serve God. I'm here to serve God, I'm here to serve humanity, and whoever's meant to be on my path, they themselves will come to me, who are operating from my same thought form and frequency, and those are the ones that I know will serve me best on my path. And that's why you got to be the best version of yourself. Then the right friends, the right wife, the right job, whatever it is that serves you at your highest extent as the man that you are, will come to you by its own self. So first you got to work on yourself, as heaven and hell are all here. You have to create that reality for yourself, as you are given the free will choice to do so, from the Sufi and Masonic perspectives. So he prays to once he goes out there, he prays to Sin, which is the moon god, for protection, and fights off lions who attacks him at the mountain pass. Because now he's serious that he's going to find out that are we just here to live and die, or is there more to this life? Because after Enkidu's death, as the gods had planned to put him on this path and purpose, that they had to realize and to get Gilgamesh going. So now he starts questioning everything, just like how they planned. So Gilgamesh comes to grips with his life and death, the respect aspect of memento mori. Like how in the Islamic Sufi perspective, you're taught not to fear death. They tell you that in the Holy Quran, Surah 5, that the life of this world is a game and an illusion, but only if they knew. And by they mean humanity. So, in the aspect of the Masonic teachings, it's the same thing. You're taught to make the best use of this life that's given to you. And that's what he's realizing too now. So, Gilgamesh sought Utnapishtim, the one who does not die, to seek immortality. And Utnapishtim is described as this pre biblical, pre Quranic Noah figure that lives at the edge of the world, which I believe is possibly, in my opinion, I could be wrong. I'm still learning as well. So, what stood out to me as the edge of the world, or I guess what's on the edge of the globe, could be Antarctica. And in Antarctica, there are many aspects where you're not allowed to go past a certain point. And there have been world leaders, high-level priests who have went there for their own reasons, and nobody knows for what reason. So in this, it's describing that Gilgamesh himself, being somebody of a high stature, goes to this location at the edge of the world to seek wisdom from this Utnapishtim individual, and who knows if that still happens today or not, as you're not, as the average civilian is not allowed to go past a certain point except those that are of a high stature. So that kind of stood out to me, as a comparison. So as time goes on, Gilgamesh realizes that it was the council of gods known as the Anunnaki who appointed man with life and death. And Utnapishtim tells him that only make your the life that you have, only make that count, because in the grand scheme of things, you know the truth of this life. And that's when Enki comes in. When there was, when the flood was about to happen, all the gods didn't want humanity to continue, but Enki kind of basically instructs Utnapishtim, who's that pre-biblical Noah figure, and tells him to build this perfect boat, how to construct it step by step, and take like a male and female version of the same species onto this boat so they can repopulate the world. And the gods were not happy with Enki's decision. And then when Enki counsels with them, they come at an impasse where Enki says, I want humanity to survive, while the gods said no. So where they made an impasse is they decide that humanity will not have a long lifespan. So your average 50 to 60 years old. That's how they wanted it. They wanted war and disease and aspects of chaos. So humanity will never know true peace in this realm. So that way the gods were happy that they would keep humanity in this circle, just keep them going in this circle from one generation to another. While Enki was happy that he was able to, even though it was not a perfect compromise, that it was still allow humanity to exist in some way. So, and it kind of makes sense because in the Holy Quran it even describes about Adam and all of these different beings that existed in the beginning of mankind's evolution, who lived up to like 500 years old, 800 years old. You look at the book of Enoch, it talks about these same prophetic figures that lived for hundreds of years old. So this talks about the pre-biblical world where those beings did live that long. And that's when Enki and the gods were able to make an impasse that's fine, just allow them to continue to exist, but there would be these stipulations of war, disease, just things to keep the humanity's thing at a balance so they don't basically destroy the planet. That's what they were compromising at. And as we see now, I still go to the park, there's trash all over the place, humanity's not respecting each other over race, religion, gender, so many things. And these ancient stories are describing the same, I guess metaphorically, they're describing it in their own way. And it just goes to show you, even in the Masonic aspect, that we need our brotherhood, where it doesn't matter what race or religion you are, we need those principles of charity, good character, and to do the right thing while we got the time to do it, and not delve into anything chaotic, which is not there to serve us in any way, shape, or form. So that's what Utnapishtim tells him of humanity's original story and why they're being allowed to exist in the condition that they are today. And Utnapishtim is actually the original Noah, who was instructed by the gods to build a boat and put all living creatures on it. The boat landed on a mountain as the Anunnaki wept, as humanity was going through order out of chaos. And even in Freemasonry, the story of Utnapishtim, or Noah, or Nu in Islam, is described in the Royal Ark Mariner. So even in Freemasonry, the story is described. Even in Sufi Islamic tradition, the story of Prophet Nu, peace be upon him, or Noah, is described. So those kind of stood out to me as well, about the aspect of life and death, and how there was a cleansing that took place on this earth, where the humanity that lived for hundreds of years with a lifespan, now there were stipulations placed upon humanity, and now this was the condition that's probably still in effect today, from like the aspect of the story, or because it's a lot of these mythologies are metaphorical, and in many ways you just gotta understand the teachings that they're trying to teach you. So the aspect of the 357 also stood out to me, because when the flood had stopped, the boat, it said for the first 3 days it stayed stuck. Then the fifth day it moved a little bit, and then the seventh day, Utnapishtim had released the birds, the ravens, and they saw the waters were starting to recede. So how like Freemasonry has a 357, the boat and the sequence of that order out of chaos was also the third day, the fifth day, and the seventh day. So that kind of stood out to me as well, which I found fascinating. Now, on to the fifth and final page of notes, and then I will offer my analysis and closing thoughts on this as well, is that Utnapishtim lives at the edge of the world, which I believed is Antarctica, and explains to Gilgamesh that it was Enki, who's also described as Ea or Ea from the different tablets and their interpretations, that humanity survived while the other gods wanted to wipe humanity out. So Enki is the mischievous god of wisdom, magic, incantation, who resides in the ocean under the earth. So one realm on top of the other. So there's an ocean inside of this earth, and that's it. That's where Enki lives. And he's the god of, they say that he's the god of this realm. So there is the supreme being, or the grand architect of the universe, the supreme godhead, like Allah, Brahman, like these different traditions describe it, even in the Sufi aspect. And then there's a being that's been in charge of this realm. So it's like what the Yazidis say, that God has left the affairs of man onto man, and how the Holy Quran says that man is the vicegerent, or the deputy of Allah on this earth. So it's also giving you the choice here, that at the end you cannot blame the grand architect of the universe. He has given you everything on this realm to either make this place a heaven for humanity or a hell, but it's humanity's collective decision which will decide which direction you want to take that forward. And the Masonic Brotherhood exemplifies that if we can all come together despite our race, religion, background, then why can't you? And it just shows you that there's always a hierarchy, and there's the story describes that there's a being here acting on behalf of God, how the Yazidis describe Malik Taus, the peacock angel, who's in charge of this realm, while the supreme God, or the supreme being, is not concerned with man and his affairs. Just like how you have the benevolent beings who don't interfere in your free will unless you ask, while the forces of darkness or chaos will always interfere in your will because they want to see you fall astray. So there is that dichotomy and that balance between order out of chaos, but you yourself determine with your choices in which way you choose to take your life and experience in existence. So there's that also with fate, but there's also your free will. So the aspect of what's happening, and it shows you even what Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh, that don't worry about humanity and the creation and life and death. You have your life, right? You have this life that you're living right now. Don't worry about what's going to happen in the grand scheme of things. Make the best of life that you have right now. And that's the lesson that Gilgamesh, he took that into his heart, and from the edge of the world he went back to Iraq, or Sumer and Uruk, and he looked around, and he had this feeling of peace within him, He looked at this city. He said, I built this city for my people. Look at the walls, look at the temples. It keeps out floods, it keeps out invaders. There's fresh crops. My people have food to eat, they have a place to stay. They have safety, security, all of those basic necessities of life that we take for granted. And he realized that that was his greatest achievement. Not conquering women, not conquering lands or enemies, or being the biggest, strongest god, or, 2/3 god, 1/3 mortal that he was. He realized that all of that was going to die with him. But when Utnapishtim gave him that peace and wisdom, that what you left behind for others is the best thing that you can do. It's like, even in the Masonic aspect, what's said that, what you do for yourself and others it's always remains immortal. What you do for yourself, it's you take it with you when your life is over. But what you do for yourself and others, it's always immortal. And that quote is always attributed to Albert Pike. But this is originally, the original epiphany comes from, Gilgamesh, or those ancient stories from the East, where a lot of these realizations were being made. And he realized that, and Kaidu taught me the value of brotherhood. And he accepted that. He looked at his city, he saw his people prosperous, and he said, I left that behind for them. And he felt happy, knowing that even if he was to die, he was okay with it, because he left something behind. And that's the aspect of the Sufi and the Mason as well, is that what good did you do for yourself and others? The degrees, the titles, everything you're going to leave behind. But what you leave behind for others, and the aspect of, helping humanity in their evolution, that's the best gift you can give, if you could leave something behind for somebody. So it's like our world and country today. We inherit that from those who fought for it, who bled for it, who died for it. And now we have that responsibility as we look at the condition of the world and we pass that on to the next generation. That would be the greatest gift that we can give them, a world that is still standing, where there's floods, climate change, and so much chaos and war and disease going on. Some of it probably by design, but we still have a responsibility to do the right thing and be at peace with ourselves, knowing I didn't break anybody's heart, I didn't do anybody wrong. I did the right thing for as long as I could, for whatever capability and time that I was meant to have. And that's what Gilgamesh realized, and that's what the true Sufi and Mason realizes as well. So the story finishes off this way. So, quote, so it is written and corrected by the scribe. This is Gilgamesh, the man who found out all things. He who experienced everything. He who searched everywhere and gained complete wisdom. He found out what was secret and uncovered what was hidden. He brought back the tale of times before the flood. He journeyed far and wide until weary and at last resigned, which is death. So they say that he experienced everything in his life. So the scribe is basically, even at that time, a scribe could be like a secretary who's recording the minutes of his life. And they describe everything that this individual went through, so much suffering. He renounced the world, everything. And at last he found peace, knowing that the true wisdom and the true secret of life is not chasing money, cars, women's, degrees. You spend your whole life doing that, but what is any of that going to do for you? The true happiness and peace of life is what good did you do for yourself and others, and the impact that you left for humanity and the world's evolution. And that's what Gilgamesh found peace, that he experienced brotherhood, he traveled far and wide, learned from different people, met Utnapishtim, and with that he had the epiphany that I built something for my people, my city, fortress, crops. Even after I'm gone, they'll still be able to live and prosper. And that's how people will always remember you. Those ideas will always be immortalized. So Gilgamesh realized that even in terms of Masonic values, everyone worries about Freemasonry's future in these changing times of technology and AI and the young people kind of doing their own thing now. And we realize that Masonic values will always be alive in the hearts and minds of those who continue to practice them. And that way your idea stays immortal. And that's what Gilgamesh realized, that I was searching immortality, but what I left behind for my people is always immortal. And look, thousands of years later, in 2021 of this calendar, we're still talking about Gilgamesh and his story and the message that he left behind. So sometimes, some way, somehow, somebody in another time will always remember you. And that's what I do with my YouTube channel, that whenever my life ends, all my stuff is out there for the seeker, for those who have a desire to know me, the message that I wanted to leave for humanity. And it's all there. Just like how he left behind his tablets, even though they were buried under the guise of different conquerors and all these people that came and conquered Sumeria, and somehow, some way, his tablets came to humanity's awareness when they did the excavations and they found these tablets. So never fear. Always do the right thing, and you will always be remembered somehow, some way. And I hope you were able to enjoy my Masonic and Sufi interpretation of Gilgamesh's story. And I thank you, and I highly encourage you to check the story out. Thank you.